Welcome to the Neurokrish Immersion. We are in the Many Phases of Freedom Season 2. In this episode, we take a journey into the archetype of liberation through insight, where freedom comes not from managing emotion, but from dismantling the illusion of who we believe ourselves to be. In our previous exploration, we examined freedom as learning to respond differently to experience, a path of emotional regulation and psychological transformation. Today, we turn to something fundamentally different, a pathway where suffering arises not from unregulated emotion, but from a profound case of mistaken identity. For certain minds, the root of bondage lies in believing the self we experience, this collection of thoughts, memories, and sensations, is who we truly are. For these individuals, no amount of emotional regulation will suffice. What they need is recognition, a sudden collapse of illusion, a seeing through of the fundamental error. Our first episode of the season was the Buddha, about response regulation. In this episode, we explore Adi Shankara, of identity dissolution. Now, who is the radical knower? What is this archetype? They are intellectually intense. They are driven by an unrelenting need to understand, to know with absolute certainty, to penetrate beneath surface appearances to ultimate truth. They tend to be inward oriented, not seeking external validation or worldly achievement, but consumed by the question of what remains when everything changeable is stripped away. Often they suffer from misidentification. For these minds, pain arises not primarily from emotion, but from the confusion of taking the constructed self as real, as permanent, as one who truly is. Advaita Vedanta is the philosophical tradition that most clearly articulates this pathway to freedom, and Adi Shankara stands as its most powerful exemplar, a life devoted not to managing suffering, but to dismantling the very illusion that creates it. Shankara was born in Kaladi, Kerala, to devout Brahmin parents. Traditional hagiographies describe him as exceptionally bright from infancy, mastering Sanskrit, absorbing the Vedas, displaying an intellectual intensity that set him apart from his peers. But more striking than his brilliance was his temperament, deeply inward turned, reflective, seemingly disinterested in the ordinary pursuits of childhood. Some minds are naturally outward looking, drawn to people, social activity, external achievement, and recognition. Others are constitutionally inward oriented, pulled towards meaning, ultimate questions, the search for what does not change. Shankara belonged firmly to the second category. He was not searching for success in the conventional sense. He was searching for that which cannot be lost, and this fundamental orientation would shape everything that followed. Shankara's wish to renounce the householder life and become a wandering monk did not arise suddenly like a lightning bolt of spiritual awakening. According to tradition, he had been asking his mother for permission repeatedly, pleading to be released from worldly obligations so he could devote himself entirely to philosophical inquiry and the pursuit of liberation. His mother refused. Again and again she said no. He was her only child, born after years of prayer, her only support in a society where widows depended on their sons. The death of his father had already left her vulnerable. How could she let him go? Even when the mind is ready for freedom, relationship and responsibility still hold us. Spiritual clarity does not automatically erase filial duty. The heart may be pointed towards transcendence, but we remain embedded in human connection, bound by love and obligation. Then comes the famous incident that would change everything. Young Shankara goes to bathe in the river Purna. Suddenly, a crocodile grips his leg and begins dragging him underwater. His mother watches in horror from the riverbank. In this moment of mortal danger, Shankara does not cry to be saved. Instead, he calls to his mother with an extraordinary request. Grant me permission to take sannyasa now so that I may die as a monk. Faced with the prospect of losing her son forever, and perhaps moved by the purity of his commitment even in the face of death, she agrees. The moment she gives her blessing, the crocodile releases him. Whether literal or symbolic, the story carries profound psychological truth. The crisis did not create the calling, it created the permission. Sometimes life must violently open the door that the heart has already chosen, but which fear or duty has kept locked. So he becomes a wandering monk, leaves home, and seeks out Govinda Bhagavat Pada, who becomes his guru and initiates him into the tradition of Advaita Vedanta. He travels throughout the subcontinent, challenging scholars, questioning ritualism, dismantling philosophical positions he sees as confused or incomplete. He establishes 4 matas, 4 monasteries in the 4 corners of India to preserve and propagate the teaching of non-dual awareness. And he composes brilliant commentaries on the Upanishads, the Brahma Sutras, and the Bhagavad Gita, crystallizing the Advaita vision. But his renunciation is not withdrawal from thought or retreat into silence. It is a fierce, relentless engagement with ideas. Brahma Satyam Jagat Mithya, Jivo Brahmaya Naparaha. Brahman alone is real, the world is illusory, the individual self is none other than Brahman. And this is the central insight of the Advaita. Freedom in Shankara's vision is not gradual purification or the slow accumulation of spiritual merit. It's not about becoming something you are not. It is the sudden collapse of error, the recognition that you have already been what you were speaking. The self you take yourself to be, this collection of memories, preferences, anxieties, achievements, is a construction, a useful fiction. But when you mistake the construction for reality, when you identify with the limited, changing, vulnerable entity, suffering inevitably arises. So the false self is about the body, the mind, the roles, the stories, all changing, all conditioned. And I take you back to the Many Faces of Maya podcast, where we talked about the story of Narada and how Narada was caught in Maya. The true self, according to Shankara, is pure awareness, unchanging witness, Sat Chit Ananda. One of the most famous stories about Shankara illustrates the gap between intellectual understanding and embodied realization. Walking through the streets of Varanasi, he encounters a man from a lower caste, a Chandala, an untouchable. Following social convention, Shankara asks the man to move aside so that he can pass without ritual contamination. And this was standard practice in those days. The Chandala replies with a piercing question: whom do you ask to move, the body or the consciousness? If all bodies are made up of the same matter, what difference is there? And if consciousness is one and undivided, where can it move? Which is the real you that could be polluted? It is said that Shankara immediately recognizes the profound truth in this challenge and bows before the man, seeing in him a manifestation of the divine teacher. The encounter reveals something crucial. Even the most penetrating insight must still confront the automatic reflexes of conditioning. Freedom is not just understanding, it is the alignment between knowing and living. Shankara then goes on a future date to debate the great scholar Mandana Mishra, not by an ordinary person, but by Mandana's own guru, Kumarila Bhatta, a man who has already withdrawn from the world and sits in a pyre of smouldering husk, slowly departing life. As Shankara approaches Mandana's home, tradition says even the parrots perched outside are debating points of Vedic philosophy. This is not a house ignorant of truth. This is inquiry fully embedded in life. Mandana Mishra represents the householder path: ritual, family, responsibility, and scholarship all combined. The question at stake in their debate is profound. Is freedom possible within life or only outside it? Must one renounce the world to know the self, or can be liberation realized while fully engaged in relationship, duty, and desire? After an extensive debate, Mandana's wife, Ubaya Bharati, herself a formidable philosopher, intervenes with a challenge of her own. She asks Shankara, "You have debated the philosophy of householder life brilliantly, but have you actually known it? Not as theory, but as lived reality. Have you experienced desire, partnership, responsibility from the inside?" And this is interesting because it is said that Mandana Mishra was at the point of losing the debate when Ubaya Bharati intervened. Shankara, having taken vows of celibacy as a young monk, admits he has not experienced the householder life. Ubaya Bharati suggests the debate is incomplete. According to legend, Shankara then enters the body of a recently deceased king through yogic power, experiencing the life of a householder, desire, governance, relationships, before eventually returning to his own form and completing the philosophical exchange. Whether literal or metaphorical, the meaning is clear. Some dimensions of truth can only be known from within life and not outside it. And therefore, true freedom must integrate the full spectrum of human experience, not bypass it through premature transcendence. Freedom really is not age-bound, and in our old traditions, we have the varnas of life. In the stage of brahmacharya, as a student, we experience learning, discipline, and foundational inquiry. Some awaken here through study and contemplation. As a grihastha, a householder, there is the stage of family, work, and worldly engagement. Many realize truth while embedded in relationship and responsibility. In the stage of vanaprastha, the forest dweller, this is the stage of gradual withdrawal, reflection, and mentoring. Freedom often ripens in this season of letting go. And finally, the stage of sannyasa, the renunciant, the stage of complete renunciation and teaching. Some reach liberation only after releasing all external attachments. Shankara's teaching acknowledges this crucial point. Freedom is not tied to a particular life stage or external condition. It is tied to the collapse of identification within the limited self. One can be a householder and awake, or a monk and still be asleep. Remarkably, Shankara's central insight that the self is a construct finds strong support in contemporary neuroscience. Modern brain imaging and cognitive research have made clear that there is no self-center in the brain, no single location where you reside. Instead, there are distributed networks creating a narrative sense of identity, a model of continuity built from memory, sensation, and prediction. When we mistake this model for reality, when we take the story the brain tells us as objectively true, suffering arises. We defend this constructed self. We fear for its future. We mourn its past losses. But what if the self is not a thing to be defended? What if it's more like a verb than a noun, a process, not an entity? Shankara's radical claim, therefore, resembles what contemporary psychology calls cognitive diffusion, the ability to observe thoughts without being dominated by them. But Advaita goes even further. It questions the very owner of experience. Now, how does our brain create an I? We often talk about the default mode network. This generates an autobiographical narrative and self-referential thinking. Our memory systems then stitch together a coherent story of who we've been. The salience network determines what matters to me. Executive control maintains the illusion of a unified decision maker. None of these networks is the self. They collectively produce the experience of selfhood. Shankara's insight predates neuroscience by over a millennium. The self is not discovered, it is constructed, and what is constructed can be deconstructed. Now, what's the neuroscience of contemplation, therefore? Contemplation targets the default mode network directly. The default mode network generates the narrative self, me, my past, my future, my story. Meditation quietens the DMM. Contemplation interrogates it. Meditation reduces DMN activity through attentional anchoring. Contemplation keeps the DMN active but questions its output. The key neural shift is not suppression but decoupling. The brain continues to produce self-referential thoughts, but belief in those thoughts weakens. And the metacognitive networks come online. The medial prefrontal cortex and anterior cingulate systems support observing, evaluating, and questioning the self model. When this happens, the narrative ownership loosens. Thoughts arise, emotions arise, sensations arise, but the automatic tag, "this is me," that diminishes. Subject-object boundaries start to soften. There's a reduced coupling between the default mode network and the salience networks, and this leads to less self-referential tagging of experience. As a consequence, suffering reduces without eliminating experience. You may still experience pain, but identity-based amplification and rumination fall away. Remember here the two arrows of the Buddha. The first arrow, which was about the actual problem that caused you pain, and the second arrow was all about amplification and rumination. Let's connect these two philosophies in that way. This pathway suits abstract, inwardly oriented minds, philosophical and cognitively agile temperaments like Shankara's. They gravitate naturally towards contemplative inquiry. This is one route, a neural route to freedom, not a universal one. There are other minds that require regulation, devotion, service, or integration. Thus, we are contrasting the method of Buddhism with Adi Shankara's work. Meditation, which is very much part of Buddhist philosophy, calms the default mode network. Contemplation, very much part of Shankara's philosophy, questions the self that the default mode network creates. Now, Shankara's method was of neti neti, not the body. The body changes, ages, can be injured. I am aware of the body, therefore I cannot be the body. Neti neti is not this, not this. Not the mind. Thoughts come and go. I observe them arising and passing. Therefore, I cannot be any particular thought. Not the emotions. Feelings shift. Joy, sadness, anger appear and dissolve. I witness them. Therefore, I am not the emotions. What remains when all these objects are negated? The unchanging witness, sakshi, awareness itself, and this is pure awareness. This is the method of neti neti, not this, not this. Through systematic inquiry, everything that can be objectified is recognized as not self. What cannot be objectified, what is always the subject, is pointed to as your true nature. What are the strengths of this path? For abstract thinkers, those with a strong metacognitive capacity, able to think about thinking, they find this path natural and compelling. For independent minds, individuals less invested in social identity and relationship, more comfortable with solitude, this resonates deeply with this approach. For the right temperament, recognition can be instantaneous, a single seeing through which there is a permanent shift in that ground of identity, a sudden liberation. The danger of the recognition path is that it can become a subtle form of spiritual bypassing, using insight to avoid feeling, using philosophy to escape relationship, using transcendence to rationalize disconnection from others. Not everyone who claims I am not the body has actually integrated that realization. Sometimes it's a conceptual understanding masquerading as liberation. There is also the risk of what might be called premature transcendence, the attempt to leap over developmental stages that require embodied integration. Some truths can only be learned through relationship, through failure, through the humbling collision with one's own limitations. Pure inquiry without emotional maturity or relational capacity can produce a kind of spiritual aridity. And this is precisely why Shankara's encounter with Mandana Mishra and Ubaya Bharati is so important to the tradition. It acknowledges that the path of pure renunciation, while valid, is not the only path. Freedom must ultimately integrate life, not stand apart from it. Adi Shankara offers us one phase of freedom, liberation through the collapse of mistaken identity. For minds built a certain way, this is the most direct path imaginable. Not freedom from reaction, but freedom from the illusion of being a separate, limited self in the first place. But not all minds are built this way. Not everyone arrives at freedom through intellectual inquiry or philosophical precision. For some, liberation does not come through asking, "Who am I?" with relentless logic. It comes through a different question entirely, one voiced not in the cool language of analysis, but in the desperate cry of longing. Where are you? These are minds that do not seek to deconstruct the self, but to dissolve it in something greater. They do not analyze experience, they are consumed by it. Their path is not recognition, but surrender, not knowledge, but love, not the radical knower, but the passionate seeker. Where Shankara uses the scalpel of inquiry to dissect illusion, Ramakrishna uses the fire of devotion to burn through separation. Where one asks with precision, the other cries with intensity. where one dismantles, the other dissolves. Both arrive at freedom, but the journey and the temperament required could not be more different. Join us next time as we explore the life and path of Sri Ramakrishna, the seeker who found God, not through philosophy, but through love so fierce it shattered the boundary between the human and the divine. So, in this episode, we've talked about Shankara, the radical knower, and his freedom through recognition, the whole story of Advaita Vedanta. In the next episode, we will talk about Sri Ramakrishna, the passionate seeker, freedom from longing. This is the Many Faces of Freedom series, Season 2 of the Neurokrish Immersion. If you like what we are doing here, do subscribe and share. We are on Apple, YouTube, and Spotify. Thank you so much.